Welcome to the Business of Family, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and opportunities of family businesses. I'm your host, Tammy Buss, and I'm a family business survivor, and I'm also a family business advisor. In this show, we'll be talking with family business leaders and experts to bring you insights and inspiration so you too can survive your family business journey. Whether you're a founder, a successor, a professional, or just curious about family business, this podcast is for you. Welcome. This is part 2 of our chat about the conservatory group, the Libfield family. If you didn't listen to number 1, go back and listen to it first, because we're sort of setting up the groundwork. So with me is Chris Delaney, and Chris, we've been working together for a bit, and we just found this case so fascinating that we thought we have to discuss it in the context of family businesses and what not to do. So just
it has a lot.
It's a lot. So just to give you the background, if you just want to recap, the Teddy, who was the dad, came over from Poland, I do believe, and escaped Auschwitz and ended up in Canada, grew a $4 billion real estate business, and then died in 2000 at 72 from a heart attack, and left his 4 boys equal shares in this conservatory group. And the mom was still alive. Gave the 4 boys each a quarter, but he did not leave a succession plan. So there was no details on what to do and how to do it. And so we were really just talking about all the things that led up to going to court. And
which is the last place that you want to settle a family business transition.
What a mess. Anyway, so where were we exactly? We had set up the boys had agreed to do some major things. So the major things were not the problem. It was the little things like the parking, who gets the parking spot. And again, these are all based on information we've read through public information. So we don't have any intimate knowledge of how how the fight started. Although we did say we'd like to have one of them on the show to actually talk about this, because this is key in family planning. Doesn't mean you have to have a $4 billion business in order to do succession planning. Succession planning is key right from the get-go.
I think so. And I think, this having been a real estate business, and I'm sure you have clients where this is something you've noticed. Sometimes the structure of the business, so the legal structure, the tax structure, is very much derivative of the economy that they're in. Mm-hmm. So this was a development company, and I guess in the development world, when you start a new business or a new building, I guess, for liability reasons, as you noted in the first part of this, you set up a new corporation, and some of it's tax-driven, some of it's protection-driven. So there were some unique qualities about this family empire where it was really a collection of different types of businesses that evolved over time into hundreds of legal entities that had no superstructure over top of it. So your point's really well taken. I mean, I think what we can draw from what we know about this case is that the general principles, things that it looked like they didn't get around to doing, are things that we see in $4 billion businesses or $4 million businesses.
Or $40,000 businesses.
Or $40,000 businesses.
And, and Dad died at 72, so he wasn't old, but by, having a business that's that complex, you would think there would be some succession planning in it. And like we mentioned before, Dad told the boys if they couldn't agree on something, just to fight it out. Because, again, we talked about the fact that I think when you have one leader, everybody sort of defers to the leader. But when you have 4 equal leaders, it's very difficult when you don't agree. And that's what ultimately happened is, I think, one of the big catalysts was moving into the States, I think going to partner. And it was a lot of money, and they had to agree on if they were going to do this. Ultimately, I think the fight ensued that they were going to go in, but not all the brothers wanted to be a part of it.
There was, I think it was a North Carolina investment that they wanted to make. and the one brother, it had already lost some money.
And
the one brother wanted to pursue,
to keep going.
He felt it would get better. The other said, let's cut our losses and get out of here.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it went the wrong way. They lost even more. I thought that was a really interesting thing. I mean, I know you do work in this space as well. I often am very curious about the biases that we have in decision making and teasing those up. Like that sort of doubling down. We see that in the investment industry.
Yeah,
right?
That's true. In gambling, everything, right? It's
gambling,
I know I'm good at this, but this is a good idea. Let's do it. But one of the things that the boys had discussed, and I thought this was kind of brilliant, is if we're going to do a big project, then and somebody doesn't want in, then we will divide that project. The 3 will go in, and the other person will get, or the person or persons will get their portion in cash, and not have any potential for growth or any take on any liability if it goes sideways.
Right.
I thought that was a pretty interesting.
It was.
Except, doesn't always work when the numbers are pretty big.
And I, as I reflected on that, because I was sure you were going to raise that, I think that it was a very clever solution.
It was a clever solution.
But it focused on money.
Yes.
And I thought that, I don't know how you feel about this, but I often feel that once you've made the relationship and the purpose and the reason you're doing these investments down to the money, legacy can be money, of course, but it changes because we all have different viewpoints on money, purpose of money, and and as I mentioned in the first part of this podcast, they were all in different lifestyles, positions in their lives. So the value of money to them is different for each of them as well. And that was maybe an unfortunate evolution that had happened unwittingly over time.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that again, so a lot of the big projects early on, I don't think, they were able to go through without a problem. It was some of the smaller things that started to cause the cracks.
Yeah.
And then, some of the loss of money. But then there was the lifestyle and wanting more than the other brothers wanted to give. Because they had to decide, they were on salaries, $240,000 each based on what we read, and the one brother couldn't figure out how you could live on that. But anyway, they didn't just get that. They also got dividends and income out of the business in various forms. And one of the brothers, I think, wanted a larger stipend.
Yeah.
And a percentage of the gross, I think, or the revenue of the business or something, the value of the businesses. And the other brothers didn't want that because, again, if you remember, Dad set it up so that they could self-fund. So you don't liquidate for lifestyle expenses.
Right.
You keep the cash in there. And when one wants some cash because they need it to sustain their lifestyle, then they have to equally get it because they're 4 equal partners.
Right.
And, if 2 say yes, 2 say no, like how does that, what happens? So ultimately, this escalated. They brought in lots of advisors to help work through it. So they were smart enough to realize they couldn't do this on their own.
Yeah. One of the people they brought in, or one of the without naming names, was a sort of a mediation group, a business consultant mediation group. And I thought that was interesting because I've always believed, maybe it'd be interesting to see if you've ever been involved in any of these things, mediation only works if the parties want to resolve the problem.
Oh yeah, I've got clients who've spent tons of money in mediation, and ultimately the same person who didn't want to do it in the going in didn't agree with the outcome coming out.
Which suggests that this is a relationship that's maybe come to its natural end.
Yes.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's always a possible outcome of these situations.
But they've gone through they tried by bringing in all of these outside advisors.
Yeah.
And they ultimately fired them all or didn't agree because, again, you want your outcome because now you've got 4 equal and all think their stance is correct.
Yes.
And you ended up having brothers on different sides. First they were all on one side, then they started to divide, and then they'd flip sides. Like, I mean, they would go with the flow. So ultimately they couldn't decide on anything.
It started to get personal
Then,
rather
yes.
than business.
Yes. Which is, the worst thing you want. No parent wants their kids pitted against each other.
Well, and we know from the three-circle model that we have to keep business decisions in
Separate,
the business circle and personals, and they had no mechanism for that whatsoever.
Because they hadn't discussed it before Dad died.
That's right.
So ultimately, let's fast forward a little bit. Ultimately, they end up in court because I want to talk about what we would have done differently, or what we could have done,
tried to do,
or suggested, or what we suggest, or things that you need to look for. So fast forward, they can't agree on anything.
Yeah.
So remember, Dad died in 2020, and fast forward to court. So they're in court. There's 4 sides to this story.
Yes. Well, and there's other positions as well. I mean, you've got the mom. She submitted. So one thing that people have to remember, if it goes to court, not always, but most of the time, like mediations will work if people want to continue the relationship, and they want to solve the problem. Arbitration, for similar reasons, can work as well. But once you've gone to court, the options available to judges, no matter what jurisdiction you're in, are limited, and they tend to be destructive of it's just where they are. And the other thing too is the way the evidence comes in these situations. It's necessarily adversarial. It has to be, because the lawyers are representing their clients. They can't say, "Oh, you got a good point there." In court, they have to advocate zealously for their clients, and so things get said, and
that
history
can't be taken back.
You can't take it. That's part of the record now, and unfortunately, the courts have limited ability to keep the thing going at that, and then it really becomes a divisive. Let's just put the beans in the piles and figure out who gets what out of this.
Well, what's interesting is that this happened during COVID, right? So
probably didn't help.
No, they went to court during COVID, and one of the comments is that on the Zoom screen there's like 14 lawyers and the judge, like it was like, I don't know, 20 people on the screen, trying to muddle through this. So you're on the stand, but you're on the stand through the screen. Which was not very good. And then Mom, who's really been sort of absent through most of this fighting, because again, the conservatory group was owned by the boys, but there was some other businesses that Mom owned a percentage in.
Yes.
A holding company or a company of some sort she had a 10% stake in. And so she got drawn into court with this.
And she made a really interesting statement, and I'm just going to read to make sure I get this quoted from this story correctly. The mother asked her lawyer to convey to the court proceeding that the conservatory group really represents the legacy of her late husband, a legacy that he was very proud of. And I guess recently her sons were as well. Now that appears to have changed. I mean, when you hear that the first part of that's the important part. The mother asked me to convey to that the conservatory group really represents the legacy of her late husband. What do you hear when you hear that?
Yeah, I mean, honest to goodness, Mom is like, she doesn't mention the boys. She's, that's changed. So her husband's legacy is now gone.
It's gone.
It's gone.
She's
all
hurting.
That she's worked for is gone. She, and I can't imagine what it's like as a mother to witness this, or as a parent to watch. You've somewhat created it because you didn't have the foresight to do some planning on, how do you make decisions? And these are the things we talk about with families is, okay, when there's a problem, how do you make the decision? Like, I love the decision of, okay, the ultimate answer is we put our names in a hat, we're going to draw the name out of a hat. Okay, that
shows trust.
It's like, yep, okay.
Yeah.
There's ways to make decisions when you have a tiebreaker or you really feel strongly. It's like, okay, well, you get this, but you can't make a decision the next time.
Yes.
Like, if you feel so strongly about this, we'll go, but it goes around. So everybody gets their say first. Like, you can't be strong against this. So how much are you going to put into this decision? Do you believe in it so much that you're willing to give up your say in the next 3 big decisions.
Right. And I've
Right.
seen decision-making models
There's tons
based
of
on that
way-
kind of
yeah.
premise. Yeah.
But the things that Dad, could have done, or how do you take out money? What's the purpose? How do you do that? How are the decisions made? I mean, I guess we're getting into results right now.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what the outcome. Or do you want to save the outcome to the end?
Well, I think we've presaged that it wasn't good from a continuity standpoint.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, without giving away the outcome here, the failure to build a model of decision making ultimately guaranteed that someone else was going to have to make the decision for them.
Yeah.
And none of us really like when a decision is forced on us by a third party, in this case, the court. And you've lost control of the narrative at that point. And the whole family's lost control.
The whole family. So you've gone from being 4 happy brothers who, when you read early, I mean, they were great. It was a great family. They, respected each other. And they still respect each other even after their dad died for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And then it just went downhill. And again, I keep saying this, it's really disappointing that Dad isn't here to see it, but Mom is here to see it.
Yeah.
And, to these things that are said in court, the, accusations, these families are pitted against each other right down to their kids. Right, like there's now cousins don't talk to each other, and they didn't even have anything to do with it.
Nothing
right,
to do with
it destroys families by not having a succession plan in place or talked about. Things like, insurance. Again, one of the big arguments was over the insurance.
Something really simple.
What's it for? How are we going to do this? How's it structured? How do we take money out? What's the percentage? What is the reasoning we take money out? How do you make the decisions?
Right.
What if you want out of the family business? What happens if somebody gets sick?
There was no exit model.
What is the exit plan? What is it to the next generation? How does it go to generation 3? You can't have generation 3 duke it out when you've got, four brothers with all, number of children. How do you make that work? You have to have those policies and procedures. You have to have governance in place.
Yeah.
And particularly when you have a business of that size and that magnitude, you would have thought that the advisors, could have strung on them somehow to get them talking. But I think we've mentioned this in previous episodes, that it's not always about the outcome of the decision. It's about the tax savings or the structure. It's about, what do you really want? What are your core values? What are you trying to achieve, as a family with this business? And the professionals a lot of times don't ask those questions.
Well, they're not incented to do it, and oftentimes it's dangerous professional ground for them to try and assume another person's position when they're advocating for their own client. And that, so it's tricky. And people have to appreciate that. Like when people have gone to their corners and are talking to their lawyers, this is not, the likelihood of a friendly ongoing outcome goes down. And it's not a negative statement. That's just the reality of the situation. It's hard for those professionals to give
but even prior
helpful
to court,
process.
But even prior to court, when they were trying to work through, when the brothers realized that they actually needed a succession plan and it wasn't working, then somehow there should have been some kind of a way to collaborate. Or maybe, and this is a hard thing to bring up, is maybe they need some other help or guidance. Maybe we need a family meeting that bring in some psychologists or people that can help on more than just we're making a decision legally, or here's the accounting decision, but how do you work together? And I think when you're trying to make a decision, when you have a lawyer and accountant in the room and you're saying we need to do this or need to do that, or this is going to impact, they say yay or nay. No, I don't agree with that. Yes, I agree with that. But they never get to the why. Let's talk about the why, and let's understand why you don't want to do this. It's more, let's go deeper than just the money.
So where would you have started with this family?
Well, the very first thing we would have started with is to understand each of the, first of all, we would have started when the dad was alive,
It
right?
would have helped.
And we
yeah.
probably would have, because I deal more with the family than the business side.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
most of the problems arise from the family side when it's first to second gen.
And I got the impression in this case, in that it's sort of generic of other cases, reflectively generic of other cases. That's what was going on.
It's family, right?
It wasn't the
so,
business.
No, so the business is successful, $4 billion business. They
Hard to argue with
they
that.
know how to run a business.
Absolutely.
But we would start with bringing all the parties together, so mom, dad, and the boys in the business or the kids in the business, and we would start with a couple of assessment tools to understand their way they communicate and how they communicate and what their underlying motivation is.
Right.
Right, and that's really important, is the underlying reason for why you do what you do. And once you get through that, then the next part we go into is more the discovery. What is, we ask everybody the same questions to sort of say, what's happening? What don't you understand? What do you want to know? And we break it down into 3 circles. So what is it you want to achieve as a family? What about the business? What about the ownership? And what does this look like?
Yeah.
And that starts the conversation. So we say there's a lot of the same themes here. Nobody knows what's supposed to happen with the business if somebody gets sick or dies or wants out. Okay, so that's something. Then you list what the priorities are and you say, okay, we're going to work through one at a time.
Right.
And then that's how we would have started. Now, if there's a pushback, and a lot of times you get pushback, but it's generally dad or mom who's the founder of the business that gets pushback on not wanting to let go.
Sure, because they're letting go decision making,
Right.
which is often perceived as power.
Yeah, and when you bring in people to help with that, if you can't let go, then maybe they need to see or talk to somebody to help them understand why, or you work through, well, you're not letting go.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're just bringing in, right? You can still oversee, you can
Right.
still be there. And we don't know this, but maybe Teddy's reason for not doing this wasn't just, well, you guys can duke it out. It was maybe he was scared of his own mortality. Maybe he was scared of giving control or picking who's going to be the leader. Maybe he didn't want to make that decision because he has 4 boys that he loves equally.
Sure.
And they're different, but how do you choose one over the other?
Well, and
So,
we all deal with loss differently.
Yeah, and you know what? It's mortality a lot of times, and control. It's like, I don't want to be the one who makes the decision on who's going to take over the business. But if they work together through it as a family,
Yeah.
you could say, well, here's what we want to happen. You're going to run this division, this division, this division. So you're each going to have equal, right? But what, or not, or you're going to have one, and here's going to be this, and here's going to be that. But what's the requirements? That's when you start getting into governance. And what about the next generation?
Yeah.
Who can come in? Because when you look at the 4 brothers, they came in completely different. One was the first one in, has a university education. One dropped out. One came in right out of school.
Yeah.
Right? There's different reasons. So is that the way you want them to come in? Is it a legacy that if you're a family member, you can come into the business regardless? But where do you start? Or how do you start? And
this was a problem, and this is true
Yeah.
for any businesses that are similar to this. I mean, the stories don't reveal how many children there were. But the next generation, the G3 that was coming along, I mean, let's say they all had 3 kids. Now we have 12.
yeah,
And they really had to start working on this
They had to.
distributed ownership, distributed decision making,
right. It
because
takes a lot of work to be a long-term
does.
family business. And, the stats prove it, only 30% transition to Gen 2. So in this case, it transitioned, but not long.
Right.
But think about the companies who have done well. There's a hotel in Japan that's been around since, I think, 718. They've
Yeah.
been through 46 generations. Like they've got it figured out, right?
Yes.
And the companies that do survive, like the Walmarts and the McCains, and yes, there's a lot of struggles sometimes within them, but they also figure out that their ultimate goal is to have a legacy that the first generation has built and spent a lot of time and a lot of effort and want to see it continue. So how do you do that? You can only do that by putting in some governance.
Well, we saw that with the mother's statement to the court. She saw this business as her husband's legacy, and I don't think that's uncommon.
No.
People, when a spouse passes away, sometimes the surviving spouse does the things that were unfinished for them as a couple, and that's fine. But that's a burden on the next generation.
It's a lot.
When do they, when is this their legacy? When are they
you want
building?
to give them guidance. It's like raising your children.
Yeah.
And when you raise your children to adulthood, now you're raising them in a business.
Right.
So it's a new raising. It's like, okay, we need to set rules. Don't touch that, it's hot. Be home at a certain time. There's rules. You can't have your cookie until you eat your dinner. So there's rules, and why we forget about it in business, or why we want to defer it and leave it to somebody else to decide and destroy families, is beyond me. Like, you far sooner have the fights, or disagreements or conflict when everybody's alive. Like, these decisions, having Dad in the room might have been, they would have been able to maybe make them a little easier. They might not have agreed, but that's okay.
Right.
You say it's for the betterment of the company, and I think that's what they lose, is this is for me, this works for me and my family and my lifestyle, but they don't look at what's the good of the company. What are we trying to do, or how are we going to preserve Dad's legacy and preserve this family legacy forever and ever and ever?
And oftentimes families don't have those conversations. You mentioned asking why 5 times. Those sort of simple approaches take you back from having to guess what the legacy actually was.
Yeah.
In this situation was no different than many others I'm sure you've encountered. I know I have too, where people say, well, I think this is what Dad would have wanted. I think this is what Mom would have wanted. You don't want to be at that point.
Conversation with them.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're out of time. So what we have to do now is reveal the results.
It did not go well.
Of this case. I mean, this case, so remember, Dad died in 2020, and the resulting decision by the judge came in 2021. And drum roll, please.
Well, the business is being sold.
Yes.
It's being broken up and sold basically into 4 equal parts.
I think actually the brothers, I think it's being sold that if you want to buy it, you can buy it. It's being sold in the open market.
Right.
So the judge didn't believe any of them.
No.
5, I understand in his judgment of 67 pages, were 5 pages of scathing, like up one side and down the other, these brothers. He didn't believe a word that came out of any of their mouths.
They were all giving self-interested testimony, which is not uncommon.
And ultimately the businesses are being sold.
Yeah.
What they're deciding, I don't even know that it's been decided. I haven't seen anything lately. Are they selling it as one entity or 350 different entities?
I'm sure it's going to be broken up.
Incorporated as 350. So if the brothers, so the ultimate money gets divided 4 ways. But if the brothers want that business back, they got to buy it back like everybody else.
Market.
Compete in an open market.
Now,
how disappointing is that?
It is disappointing, and there were probably some legacy constructions that they would have liked to retain control over, simply because that had been the beginning of it all.
Well, you know what I want to see, and I don't know that we'll get to this, but I would love to see when it goes, is actually out there in the open market. I want to see the bidding between the brothers.
Yeah, are they prepared to put their money where their mouth is?
Which one is important to them, and which one do they want to own? But anyway, this is a fascinating case. So if any of you have not, if you own a family business and you want to know what not to do, drag out this case and read it. There's lots of articles on it, lots of judgments, lots of information.
It's fascinating.
It's a very fascinating, and I'm sure the movie will be out soon. Anyway, thanks, Chris, for joining me.
A pleasure.
This was great. We'll have to do this again.
I hope so. I really enjoy the time spent here talking about these interesting cases.
Yes. Anyway, thank you. Take care, everybody. If you like this episode, subscribe to the Business of Family podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can also find BlueRoots on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On the next show, I'll be back with another amazing guest who will inspire you with their family business insights. Until then, take care and keep it in the family. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, tax, investment, or insurance advice. Before acting on any advice, please contact your personal or company advisors.